I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6 o'clock. Can you help me? And I had a tough time actually getting on Zoom here. Can you help me with the roll call of attendance, please?
Yeah, let me just get my notes page open really quick, and then I'll start with the roll call.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go through roll call for attendance. Alex Garino. Okay, present. Samuel Hockenberry. Okay, absent. Karen McMaster. Present. If you could say it out loud, that'd be great. Thanks.
Yeah.
John Sager. Okay, absent. Don Valerio. Present. If you can say it, please, that would be great.
I'm here.
Thank you. Douglas Butler.
Here.
Lorna Davidson Connolly. Karen DeJoy.
Here.
Theodore Knoll.
Here.
Carol Plotkin.
Here.
Gail Sievert.
Here.
And Rob Vincent. I'm sorry.
Here.
Yeah, Robert.
I'm
Bob.
here.
Sorry. Yes, I can hear you. And then
was Sam Hockenberry here or not?
no, he's absent.
I didn't
at
catch
least
that.
as of right now.
Okay. Thanks. And we also have Noah with us, right?
Correct. Yes, we have Noah from JM Goldson. And is anybody else going to be joining us, Noah? Do you know?
No, just me tonight.
Okay.
Okay, so it looks like we have 9 of the 12. So we'll move on to item number 3, discussion. Sam and Noah, I'll kick it over to you all.
Yeah, I'm happy to start talking through. I think just in terms of overall theme for this evening, it's speaking a little bit about our reactions to the housing needs assessment, that data heavy portion thing sent out last week. So then we, the consultants, can go back and revise it as needed. But then to really start getting our heads into a position of thinking about how do we address some of these needs and challenges that we spoke about or touched on in the data heavy portion, so that next time we meet in February, we can have a really good brainstorming session. And hopefully we'll talk about this at the very end, whether that could be potentially hybrid and get to look at each other and really get the ideas flowing. But before that, talk a little bit about the housing needs assessment discussion, and then touch a little bit about on the survey, what we heard from that, try to sort of put the data in perspective with what hearing from the people who took the time to take the survey. So I actually didn't have any big slides for the housing needs assessment discussion. I have my pen and my trusty notebook, and just wanted to ask if it'd be okay, Bob, just to folks to raise their hands and provide comments that we can then go back and get things.
Yeah, that's fine. If anybody has any questions or comments on the housing needs assessment, go ahead and raise your hand. And Sam, if you can help me locate if anybody has their hands up.
Yes, I can help you with that. There isn't anybody now, so I'll defer to Noah to continue.
Sure, yeah.
One of the things I will say, Noah.
Oh, yeah, there is one hand up now for Theo. Theo, did you want to ask your question?
I'm playing with computers here. Sorry.
Oh.
I'm all tangled.
Okay, continue.
Yeah, no. The so like some of the impressions I got, like the I have some specific questions about some of the tables, and so I'll shoot them to you, Noah, like just about maybe kind of what the data is trying to show.
Yeah.
But also like some of the impression is I don't know, like our population is growing just ever so slightly. Are we losing kids, or like I know household size is going down and we're getting older on average, but are we losing school age kids? This is where I got
Yeah, I
somewhat
think
tripped
you
up.
are. I think you are just thinking in the perspective of today and then 15 years in the future in 2040. There's actually a
Yeah.
really big cohort of kids right now, but they're not going to get replaced by nearly as many.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
But yeah, just want to echo, feel free to also email me your comments. We put them into a nice long spreadsheet that will then be updated when we go and make revisions so we can keep track of everything. But no need to bring them up now if you'd prefer to write me.
Yeah, they're a little bit of kind of a little sort of micro, and so yeah, I mean like getting to know more of the gist what is better for this group. But we sort of the other question is like we're talking about household size, and that's getting smaller. Like in terms of housing demand, current and future housing demand, like what does that mean? Like, because I think some of the critique of a lot of suburbs, right, is that we're aging and we're overhoused, right? People would prefer to downsize or go somewhere else, or younger households would prefer not to buy a 4-bedroom house or whatever. Like, so I'm sort of like, can you sort of maybe talk through some of that and
Yeah,
what we're
for sure. And to put it into context, I think this is at the very beginning of the PDF. There are two different projections for population. One is done by MassDOT and the other is done by UMass's Donahue Institute. And one predicts a little bit of an increase in population, and the other actually predicts a slight decline. And so we're using the increased population projection to then go and look at the future. But I think it would I'd be remiss as a planner not to say projections are all based on current factors, and they're all estimates, and estimates are often wrong. They can be really well put together and well thought out, but it's still an estimate at the end of the day. I think it's going to be a great tool to use this, but just knowing that even the state, some of the planning tools that the state uses to forecast things are not 100% aligned on things. They're not projecting a huge amount of growth, but there's like a few more people potentially being added and then a slight decline. And so taking things from the slight growth perspective, you will need to add a few housing units. In particular, it's looking at senior households as those being the largest share by far. I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, most of the other age groups will be decreasing their share, but seniors are going to increase. I think it was over 1,000 new senior households by 2040. And to me, that was talking it over with our team, that was the biggest potentially the biggest change in population to focus on and start thinking about goals and strategies. But that trickles down into, I think it's 988 new housing units being expected for Wakefield. And that's in addition to, or that's accounting for, a healthy amount of vacancy. And part of, I was actually speaking with a realtor today in Wakefield for one of our interviews, and she was talking about how you have really high interest rates and really low supply, and the gears are not turning right now. So you need to build more units, not just so you have enough homes for everyone who lives in town, but also you want a little bit of a buffer. You need vacant rental units and vacant homeownership units to ensure that there's a little bit of room and things aren't quite so tight. So I hope that helps a little bit, Theo, just explaining where some of the thought comes from that and what it's going to mean for this plan.
and that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, so sorry, I'll raise my hand. Is there anybody else?
Go ahead, Doug.
I guess that the demographics piece is the part that I was not concerned about, but just trying to get a better
Mm.
handle on understanding. And again, this notion that there's the growth of seniors is not, I don't think we're having a bunch of seniors moving to Wakefield. We are having just in 2040, I'm going to be a senior. So, knock on wood. But I think it's that our demographic now, we've aged, so our average age is somewhere in the mid or late 40s. And so in 15 years' time, we'll be, there's a healthy population there. I guess the concern there is we've got this, are we thinking about this notion of building senior housing for existing seniors who either are or are not going to sell their house?
Yeah, and I think just another way to complicate things and make you guys' job a little bit harder is there are the current needs today right now. And just hearing from the survey and talking to folks in our interviews, seniors struggling right now and needing more senior housing options. And then you have to also think about what's it going to be like in 15 to 20 years and balance those two things. And we will, when we do goals and strategies, put everything in a timeline, thinking like it's a 5-year plan, so we're not going 15 years, but we can say first few years, what are the things you're going to emphasize, and then maybe planning for some bigger projects there. But I think that's just the other consideration to weigh is there are your needs today right now. I think it's close to what is it, 3,000 households are cost burden, paying more than a third of their income in Wakefield today and really struggling. And then balancing that with the projection of more households in the future that are also experiencing cost burden. And I think it's going to be just a part of our discussion and why being in person or hybrid at least could be good for the next meeting, so we can get a little more into the details on that and figure out what to prioritize and really focus on.
And the thing that strikes me really is like the cost burden and the variance between the homeownership gap for middle income households. Effectively anyone earning 120% or less of the median income is priced out of Wakefield, and there's not even rental housing for them either. And so that's like where we have our 40B obligation, so we're not planning for those units, and we can't even provide market rate housing for people to afford either. So it's I think that's a real challenge.
I thought it was interesting though, we're roughly 60-40, single family, multifamily, and so are the rest of the communities around us, with the exception of Linfield and Reading, which are more 75 and 85% single family. But like we've got 40% sort of multifamily right now, and I'm not sure in terms of, we probably don't have quite, the variance between, and I forget what it was, between rental and but I guess the question is what are we looking to achieve here? And I don't know that there's a solution that gets somebody who's at 100 and who's at the median income. We can't solve that problem with interest rates where they are. For somebody to buy a home, we can build rental property, or we can incent rental properties being built, but home ownership is going to be pretty market based unless we do something dramatic, right?
Mr.
Well,
Chair, There are also, I just want to let you know, Alex Covino has her hand. I'm sorry, Garina. It's
I'm sorry.
on your digital, whatever your name on
Sorry,
here.
Switching back and forth.
It's okay. Been there.
Alex and Carol had their hands up. I don't know
and
who had their
then
hand up first. but
Alex
and
and Carol both have their hand up, just to give you a heads up so that we make sure everybody gets a chance to talk too.
Sorry, I'll shut up now.
Go ahead, Alex. I don't know who had your hand up first between you and Carol, but
Sure. Just going back to, we were talking about, the increasing population of, the older community and that households are decreasing. Is that taking into account that people, are having children later in life because the cost burden is so much higher, especially in this area? I think we need to be, cognizant of, it might be people are, mid 30s, almost 40s before they're having their first or second child now, instead of just, it's older and much smaller populations.
Yeah, I believe that they do take into account that, but it is certainly these numbers are updated every year as they, variables change. But I think that is like a really big part of it. And something just that pops up in the report over and over again are references to this Greater Boston Housing Report card that came out at the end of last year. Something really interesting in there that's not in here was that we have negative domestic outmigration, which means more people are moving out of Massachusetts than are moving in. The only reason our populations are staying high is actually like people from other countries moving in. And so I think that's just really, really bonkers to me. I'm still putting my head around it. But I think that like shows just going on top of people waiting a long time to have kids, people moving out of here because they can't afford to buy a home and going other places, a competitiveness issue. But sorry, that didn't quite answer your question, but I think that's a really good point yet, Alex.
No, thank you. And I see that in real estate, even just crossing the border to New Hampshire. It's like any young family just leaving Massachusetts, even though they prefer to be here. Thank you.
go ahead, Carol. You had your hand up too.
Thanks, Robert. More of a comment. I was thinking about when you ask an AI a question, and you usually say to it, give me the source, right? To sort of help you understand the answer. Well, I do anyway, to help me understand the answer. And I was thinking about the source, and I feel like the people who took the survey kind of are me. I'm a senior, I own my own house. I'm not worried about affording it now, but worry about it in the future, etc. I'm kind of the poster child for the answer. And so I was really interested in your comments, Noah and Sam, about what you do when the data are skewed sort of to one cohort.
Yeah, I think my quick answer there is just, and we'll talk about this with the survey in a second and kind of compare survey takers versus the census. And I think it helps particularly with a lot of the write-in comments and just understanding like we're getting a certain segment of the population and getting how they're feeling, but understanding that they might not represent everyone. And we're not quite done with the interviews yet, still have yet to say interview folks that are residents in the housing authority. And I think the other piece of that might be trying to put greater stock or greater weight when talking to people that are outside of this well-represented group to try to get the whole picture. But it's tough to get to hold all these different things in your head and say, yeah, we have a lot of seniors are struggling, and then a lot of young people are struggling, and people who we haven't quite heard from. But yeah, it's definitely a challenge to try to make sure that you're not overrepresenting one group that was really good at taking the survey and not forgetting others. I think it's something we'll have to just keep working on and try to stay accountable on. And appreciate all you guys because you're actually in the town and hearing from people, helping us make sure that what we're talking about and thinking about it feels authentic to you. I don't know if Sam has any other plan or response to that.
I don't have much to add. We continue to reach out. We unfortunately can't. I'm sorry, it's so loud. Hold on. Okay, thanks. Sorry. So what I was trying to say is we do the best we can to reach out, reaching out to as many entities and developments, there's only so much we can control in the data that we get back. And we continue to reach out. I continue to have these conversations. I've talked to Noah about a number of them I've had with the residents in the area. Again, some of them do follow up and some of them don't. I did get a number of different surveys from people who had been, who had utilized or applied to or reached out or questioned about the Wakefield Renters Assistance Program that we have for rental deposits. But again, we can only control so much of what we're getting back. So the data, when it does come in, is helpful. It also helps us to get a gauge on the support of the community, because likely some of this will, as the previous housing production plan did, require some zoning changes. So we'll have to have some support at town meeting. It will require a shift in thinking if we're going to be looking to create any affordable housing developments, whether that's capital A or lowercase a affordable or attainable or whatever other language you want to use. There are a lot of different components that the public engagement in general will play into. But as for, we would love to be able to target who we're getting feedback from and who's completing the surveys and who's really giving that back and forth engagement. And there are plenty of classes you can take out there about trying to encourage it. And, you know, it still comes down to we do the best we can. And then, as Noah was saying, there's some interviews he still has to do, and that is a good place also to get some really great, very dialed in feedback. But it's a matter of being able to pull and get those responses. And, you know, I believe we really did work pretty hard to do the best we could. And I will continue to reach out and encourage them to get involved. I literally had a conversation with somebody on the street this fall about, and I was like, we're doing the housing production plan, please come be engaged. Like, we would love to have someone who's, you know, experiencing some of these concerns that people are very aware of, but maybe don't have that personal experience. And we really need those voices. So please do get engaged. It's kind of the best we can do right now.
Well, I know that we got less people in this survey, 532, than we got with the MBTA 40A, but that was a hot button issue over the summer, and there was a lot of interest in town on that particular issue. But Noah, for a town of our size, 27,000 people, a 532 person participation in the survey, do you find that's something you've seen with other towns of similar size? Is that more or less than what you normally see?
It's pretty similar. Yeah, it's not unusual, and I think particularly people get fatigued of being asked to take surveys over and over again. And the other problem is a plan is so great, right? We're being proactive. We're trying to tackle the problem. But it's not as motivating, I think, as like something like MBTA communities. That is, real change is happening and people are fired up about it. I think that's the eternal question of how to get people more engaged, and it takes time and energy and resources, but we're always trying to get more folks involved. But no, I'd say to your question, Bob, that it was a pretty solid number, and we held it open a few more weeks than I think we'd planned, which was good to just make sure. And it did tick up about 100 more responses, I would say, between when we were originally going to close it in mid-December. So I'm glad we ended up doing that and got a few more voices. And also just wanted to shout out Samantha for hand entering a lot of like the handwritten surveys. Like, that was really helpful. And those are the surveys I think that we really want to make sure that we get to pay attention to. And so yeah, just kudos to you.
Doug, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I think in terms of the survey, the thing that like was dissonant for me anyway was the 65% of the people who had difficulty finding housing in Wakefield that meets their needs, whereas 81% of them own their own house. It just seemed like I'm confused. I don't know if I think just people probably just answer something, but in the past 5 years, have you had difficulty finding housing in Wakefield that meets your needs? 65% seems like an astonishingly high number for survey respondents, for people who are responding to the survey who skew older, skew homeowner, skew everything. They've had trouble
Yeah.
finding a place. My guess is 300 of them haven't even looked for a place in the past 5 years.
And I think that might have been what happened. We had this sort of conditional formatting thing. And I might be misremembering, but it was like, if you have looked for housing, have you had that problem? So it was a
Oh,
small
okay. So yeah. All right, that's fine.
Yeah, I
It's
was
more just it wasn't like it wasn't 350 people out of 500 saying like a hard time meeting our needs. Okay.
No,
That's
and
good.
one other thing I think you could also keep in mind when you're thinking about this is sometimes people are looking for housing and they end up not being able to find something that is the size that they need. Or you have, whether it's a senior that's looking for housing, you have a young family that's looking for housing, they might not find something in their price range. Or they may just not, because there's not a lot on the market right now, they might not be, I mean, I could be one of those. I mean, I literally am one of those. Like I couldn't find a house in Wakefield. I looked and we looked from January to June. Actually, no, we looked from December to June from when I got hired. So we had 7 months and there was one house that came close. It got 3 offers. It went well over what they were asking at that point. There were other ones that were pushing budget. I mean, even for people who have the means and they have the down payment, they have the capacity, they have the jobs. They're not necessarily the demographic target that we're looking for on the survey, but there are still issues that people face outside of what you may be thinking traditionally, where someone really can't afford something. There's also seniors that are coming in, and I've had a number of them with the RAP program too that have expressed that there's a lot of, it's not just about having something that's in budget. It's also, is it accessible? Does it have enough bedrooms? Does it have, I can't do stairs, for whatever reason, I can't. So there's certain places that they may not be able to live in, or there's mold. I mean, there was somebody who was talking, also reached out to me, who was in the process of moving because there was mold in their unit. I mean, there's all sorts of different things, and I think different reasons that could impact that.
Sure.
Karen, before I call on you, we've kind of segued over into 3B, which is the survey. Does anyone have any other questions or comments about the housing needs assessment? I will thank you, Noah, that I'm glad you had a summary after each of the sections. That was useful, because I find if I read the summary first, it kind of sets the table when I go back and read the meats and potatoes. So I appreciate the summary that you and your team put together. Okay, Karen, you had your hand up.
Yeah, so just quickly, I think I say it at every meeting because I run into people all the time and I'm getting close to that age. So I live on a 2-family in Nahan Street, and fortunately, my mother has owned the house for many years, and I live upstairs and she's downstairs. If I wasn't here, she would love to sell her house, but she does not want to live in a condo. To be in a condo and have to go down the hallways and up the elevator, it doesn't meet everybody's needs. And I think when Doug mentioned, well, what do you mean somebody's that's elderly, that owns a house, that's looking for an alternative? That's a huge alternative. If I wasn't here and she was in that apartment, she would either be renting it and some of it too, you move into a condo, I'm looking at the median price, it's 564,000. So even if she sold her house and she made a $200,000 profit, the taxes keep going up and you're on a fixed budget. You could easily run out of that money quick. So I guess, and she was on many housing lists, and she's not the only one. I mean, she was on Linfield and had to put a deposit down for 2,000. 10 years later, we're like, can we just have the deposit back? Not even close. So these are some of the things that they were doing that they stopped, was building small townhouses or something that resembles their home that they've been in for 50 years. And this is something we're getting away from. And a lot of people that where I live, and I'll cut short, they're living in homes that they're not maintaining. And then these homes are running into dismay and they're not taking care of them because they don't have an option. And they're like, I'm not going to sell my house and go live in a condo. I want to stay here or something that resembles it. So by the time they do sell the house, a developer's buying it, knocking it down and making it into something that maybe the neighborhood and maybe they never wanted it to be. So that's just my input again on some of that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One quick thing to add, kind of going off of what McMaster was just talking about, there was a section on the survey, which was, I think was really interesting on the data about a lot of people weren't able to take care of their homes. A lot of people noted that there were structural issues with roofing or plumbing or electrical or whatever, when that category is. On the hard copy surveys that I got, a lot of people had noted that that was an issue, something that they couldn't come up and handle, and something I also personally saw a lot of when we were looking for spend those 7 months looking for houses. So many houses, even with millennials, because with younger generations, because they buy at the top of their budget and they can't take care of the houses because the house prices are so high. And then you've got seniors who want to age in place, and they also can't take care of the house. We can't tell you how many houses we saw literal holes like in the side of the house. And it's unfortunate circumstance right now. So yes, it would be great if this is something that is included. And obviously it's as it's being displayed by the housing needs assessment as well as the survey. I have a feeling there will be some different ways to kind of help support the needs. Like Lenoa was saying, in the next 5 years, you can't really plan out for 15 to 20, but with the awareness, it's clearly something that needs to be addressed.
Thank you. Noah, do you want to comment about the survey or summarize the survey?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I have a few slides. I might go a little faster through a few of them because we've already touched on them, but there was one, and oh, Samantha, I wonder if you could let me share my screen. Oh, there we go. Perfect.
Yes, I already did.
Thank you so much. Well, we touched on this a little bit. Let me just zoom in here. There's a difference between, of course, those who took the survey and the census data that we have. We always get more people who live in single family homes, it seems, than are proportionately representative. So there's a few more folks here. That's this orange bar on the left. This is the navy dark blue bar of census data. Got one person, I think, who lives in an ADU in Wakefield, which is kind of fun. So yeah, just looking through this kind of qualitative demographic data helps us to say, okay, we know who took this survey, and also can think about who might have been underrepresented, thinking about whose voices might be coming through the loudest. Mostly homeowners, not unusual at all in any of our surveys. And interestingly, mostly people with 2 folks in their household or 4 or more, which I like the 4 or more actually getting a good representation of that, because families often in our surveys are underrepresented. But as you can see, this orange bar is a little higher than the census percentage there.
What's an ADU?
Yeah. Oh, so sorry. ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. That's like a backyard cottage, or it could be in your attic, your basement. And it's what the state just legalized, or I think come February, it's going to be technically legal in every single family zoned lot. You could add an extra in-laws apartment, something like that. And please do stop me if I drop any more jargon. It's a bad habit of mine. I really wanted to pause on this slide here. Reading through all of the write-in comments, a few of the questions had, other, and people went in and wrote things. I kind of pulled out 5 themes, hearing people over and over again about affordability, concerns about overdevelopment, housing availability, traffic and infrastructure, and then balancing this development and I think identity or a sense of place. Like Wakefield needs to grow without destroying its open spaces, green lands, and overall charm. A lot of folks said this in fewer words, or a little more, even more more emotionally charged ways. But I think this is for the next month, thinking about this when we get into goals and strategies next month. How can we balance development identity? How can we learn how to talk about traffic and infrastructure impacts, and how new housing maybe can make things better, thinking about it from an opportunity perspective, and also acknowledging that there are going to be some negative effects too, and that all of these problems are interrelated. So yeah, I just wanted to share this right here. This is also in the summary that we emailed out. But just know that definitely these big themes were coming through loud and clear in the survey from the folks that were responding to the survey. About too many buildings, and we built enough buildings here, let other towns build more. Heard that over and over and over again.
These seem competing.
Competing?
Yes, these themes, they're not intertwined so much as they're competitive almost. Like,
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Doug. Does anyone, I just wondered if anyone else had any other thoughts on these survey theme responses, open-ended things.
I think
We
in
hear this stuff all
earlier,
the time.
sorry, it's Theo. In earlier meetings, I think we've really talked about the need to represent younger households and lower income households. And this makes it very clear that I think a lot of their voices are not heard.
Hmm.
And I actually am having somewhat of a visceral, angry response to some of this. Because it seems like people are not looking beyond their immediate perspective or not. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, I hear that, Theo. And I think the survey, because it is so anonymous and digital, like it can get people's sort of most base instincts coming out. But it's also good to know, like, this is how there's a segment of town that feels this way in different ways. And at the very least, learning how to talk about some of the things people are feeling, to work towards common solutions and things that I think Sam touched on. You have to be able to get things approved at town meeting and talk about things. I believe a part of this housing plan scope is us talking about some of these housing challenges like traffic impacts and infrastructure. And I think at the very least, coming up with some good research and data and talking points for each of those to make it easier to bridge the divide, or at least have an informed conversation. But yeah, that's all I'll say on that for now. Well, I'm gonna keep moving along if there's no other hands up.
Go ahead.
Okay. Are your housing costs currently too expensive? Not everyone said yes, they are, but this middle bar right here, no, my housing costs are not too expensive currently, but I'm concerned that they could be in the future. Just knowing that they're, I think pretty obviously people are concerned, and not just about their immediate, the people who are currently cost burdened, but yeah, the way things are going, I could be cost burdened soon, and that's we're thinking. This text is way too small, and I'll just note in that PDF, it's formatted vertically and easier to read through these things. But I just wanted to read out these top three. What are the main things that worry you about housing in Wakefield? Lack of starter homes. The majority clicked that. It was select all that apply, that kind of formatting. Second, tearing down of small homes to build larger ones. And third, which I think gets to the conversation of affordable housing versus housing that is affordable. People clicked lack of naturally occurring affordable housing, and that's housing that's not deed restricted, that's not going to appear on your subsidized housing inventory on the state list that gets you to 10%. But broadly, housing that is affordable to most people to purchase, and folks are worried about that. And then right below it, available housing of all types, and then aging in place in my home, and then other concerns, which is where some of the things we looked at on the previous slide came from. So then asked a sort of similar question, but maybe not quite concerns, but real tangible things. Where are you or others struggling with housing in Wakefield? Number one, most responded to was property taxes, and there's a graph in the housing needs assessment that shows how, while the tax rate has stayed relatively flat, I think it went up a little bit. If your home value goes up a huge amount over time, those property taxes are going to go up too. So there is some concern there. And then mortgage and rent costs, of course, just that broader affordability of being able to afford where you live. And then the third one I think is interesting, particularly because Wakefield is doing something about this, at least for renters in the short term, with the renters program that Samantha mentioned. The high barrier of entry for housing, application fees, first and last deposit. I think the governor this week was talking about even banning broker fees. So it's exciting to see some movement on these things. And next month we can talk about other ideas that the town could work on. After that, high utility bills, limited housing stock for home ownership, and lack of desired housing options, which I think goes back to what Karen was saying about, well, maybe someone doesn't want to downsize into a condo. They want to live in a home that looks, at least on the outside, similar to where they've been. So more options, definitely. People are struggling to find options that work for them in town or in the area. So a third here is just how can the town work to better address these housing needs? And it was a similar rank your answers. People broadly said encouraging and assisting the reuse and renovation of older, underutilized, unused, or vacant properties. It's snipped off a little bit there, but basically making better use of land that's currently available, and maybe it's not the best utilized right now. And I think this is something, just sorry not to skip to the end of the agenda, but when we go do our community tour and look at areas, we can identify some opportunity sites, put them in the plan of this place at this address. This would be a great place for housing to be redeveloped or renovated. Also talking about helping to fund accessibility and aging-friendly home renovations. One other data point from the survey, I think that points to this, is we asked folks, just what are your feelings about your housing in general? I don't have the graph up here because it was a little too wordy, but a lot of people said that they were concerned about their home not being accessible. People were generally happy with their home overall and felt like they were going to stay there in the next 10 years. But that accessibility piece of stairs, steps, not being wheelchair friendly, that was a big concern. And so I think thinking proactive about ways to address that could be good. And of course, creating more affordable home ownership opportunities. I think Doug touched on that a little bit. That is something that you can create affordable home ownership. It doesn't have to just be rental, and it can be at certain income brackets that we can look at some of these current needs and say, oh, people at 30% AMI or 60% of area median income or 80%, we could really focus our attention there. And then fourth, just the last one I'll read on here, is preserve existing affordable housing, which could be for units that are listed on that state list, the subsidized housing inventory. Some of them only have a 20, 25, 30-year restriction on them, and you actually need to preserve them and keep them from expiring and going market rate. So there's some thoughts there. And then I think this other one right below it is interesting, just helping to fund the creation of accessory dwelling units. That was the backyard cottage, or it's an in-law suite in your house. Yeah, I'm not sure how the town could help facilitate that, but I think it's interesting as something to think about over the next month before we do our conversations. Yeah, that's it for the survey. I'll stop sharing right now, and yeah, looks like Doug's got a raised hand.
Go ahead, Doug.
Or just on that last slide that you had up, and just in general, I mean, that first one where 60-something% of the people, that's like, do you like apple pie? Like, do we want to encourage people to like better anytime you ask people, oh, what should the government do? Oh, should we better use things that are underutilized? Yeah, of course, that's what the people want. But it's too squishy a question. I guess from my standpoint around this survey is this the same survey that you have largely given to a lot of other towns? Or are a lot of the same questions ones you've seen throughout? And that would be where it would be interesting for me to see, like, oh, here's what we're saying, and here's what, the previous 7 towns you talked to say that these are their problems. Just to get a sense of like, oh, is this a Wakefield specific issue, or is this just everybody wants this?
Yeah, I like that comparison there. It's a little squishy. We ended up tailoring this actually a lot more than we usually do for surveys. So it's actually one that's pretty different from usual, but it does make me wonder, if I dig up Danvers' survey we ran over the summer, I think they'd be the closest, most recent comparison, and asked a few similar questions at the end, like, what do you think the town could do? Yeah, that would be interesting to pull it up and see what people ranked. I think property taxes being high, like that's always on there. But honestly, encouraging.
Well, but property taxes being high for people versus the mortgage and home costs is because probably half of your respondents don't pay anything other than property taxes. So yeah, the thing they'll bitch about are the taxes.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'll have to dig it up and see if there's there's some good takeaways to share with you guys. And yeah, if it's a more regional thing or it's a hyper local specific to Wakefield, I think it's a good idea, a good thought.
One of the comments about the high barrier for entry for housing, the application fees and mortgage down payment. As you all know, we now do have an affordable housing trust fund with a board of trustees, and they're currently helping folks with renters assistance. But and Gail, I know you serve on that board as well as that town council representative, Chair McLean. But that's one of the other things that the board of trustees will be talking about over time is evolving from renters assistance to other types of assistance, which could be for first-time home buyers as well. We just got a late start in Wakefield on that. I mean, that was something that was recommended in the last housing production plan at its inception in 2015, but it never got off the ground until 2022. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund piece is still in its infancy stage, as opposed to being almost a decade old. It's only a couple years old. So that's something over time we might be able to provide, some additional assistance to answer some of the questions and concerns that were expressed in the survey. If nobody has any other questions on the survey summary, because I see it's 6:45. Noah, do you want to talk about 3C development constraints?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bob. And this won't take up too much of your time. Similar to how we presented a little bit on the chapter as a preview and then sent it out ahead of time. For next month, the deliverable a week before will be just another chapter it's a required part of a housing production plan on development constraints, which is basically going through all the different reasons, the factors that would make it hard to build housing, like zoning or the environment. And so I just had a few like 4 slides to show on that. And then we can keep this this presentation rolling along. Hope you guys can see my screen okay. I wanted to talk about four factors and then see if it jogged any ideas on additional things we can add. And the chapter does have much more detail than this, but I wanted just to talk about what constrains development, what makes it difficult to build housing. If we're just thinking about there's a lack of a supply. And this is just part of what the state asks that housing production plans contain. So first one is market feasibility, which I think is not talked about enough, just how hard it is to actually build a unit of housing. This is just one of many charts and graphs that are included in the chapter, showing from the St. Louis Fed how construction materials have really skyrocketed, particularly in the last few years. This is 2017 right here, really shot up. And it's a similar story for wages of construction workers, for land costs, for your construction materials, and interest rates as well, which have all conspired to make it really expensive, really difficult to build housing. So that's a huge constraint that isn't by and large in the town's control. You can't go and make construction materials cheaper, but it is something that really affects it, and it's a problem, a variable to keep in mind when we're thinking and talking about why is housing so expensive? Why is it so hard to get more housing built? The second part is more bread and butter. Well, there are parts of the environment that it's not conducive to build housing, and nearly 20% of Wakefield is classified in one way or another as a wetland by the state, where development is really difficult and or prohibited. And that's in addition to your lakes, but there's a good amount of just wetland area too, where development is strictly regulated by the Wetlands Protection Act. There are other regulations like Title V, which governs septic setbacks and wells. It's not as big of a deal in your town, but in other places, that's a big factor. And also flood zones, like FEMA designated flood zones where there's a high risk and where you'll be required to have insurance. And I think as we're seeing more and more natural disasters taking place, lenders getting more concerned and prices going up as in the short term. Those are things that are going to constrain or at least channel development, make you think about where you're going to build. And if it is a flood zone, you might opt not to invest in that area. And this is just wetlands. And so we've got maps of different flood zones where those Title V setbacks are, as well as environmental habitats to areas of critical environmental concern by a different set of regulations. So there's a whole section just on environmental constraints to building housing too. And then I think most interesting, or not most interesting, but kind of interesting, is the infrastructure piece too. We got some GIS data from the town on where your water mains and where your sewer mains are located. Thinking about, well, that's a constraint too, particularly if you're talking about developing multifamily housing and you're in a place where it's not feasible to be siting septic tanks. Is there capacity? Are there areas where there aren't existing connections? This map on the right is just showing how all of like sewage in Wakefield slowly runs all the way into the bay. I thought that was just kind of interesting thinking about you're part of the broader MWRA system. And it's similar, but not exactly the same for drinking water. The town has some MWRA, but there's also a local plant, a local treatment center. And I believe, yeah. Oh, don't have it in this presentation, but that'll be another thing to look out for when we send the chapter your way to read through and review. Finally, there's the most exciting and a boring part, the zoning piece of regulations, which is a town level ability to say where things can and can't be built. We do a little bit of spatial analysis, so we load stuff into GIS and we get layers from the state, which tracks. I think it's a few years old, so it's not 100% up to date. And happy to update this if we have some other GIS data on it. But a good portion of Wakefield is zoned just for single family homes, about 66% by this slightly outdated estimation. That means a good portion of your town is only available for people who can afford a single family home. I'm not saying that's a good or a bad thing, but it's just part of this sort of looking at how regulations can affect what can be built where. On the flip side of that, we talked about ADUs a little bit. So that means just by definition, broadly, and it'll depend on the exact regulations you guys approve at town meeting, but basically every single family zone lot, on paper at least, you can add an extra unit to. So that's a huge advantage, not so much of a constraint, but yeah. So that's another sort of angle to think about it. And the other piece of it is your MBTA communities overlay districts, which are by and large over here by your train stations and allow multifamily development by right. So you're not needing to go get a special permit, a special approval to build. So that's just the sort of grain of salt there of your base zoning says 66%, but with ADUs, there's extra capacity now because of the state law. And also because you're compliant with MBTA communities, you have more room to build in these areas that are close to the train station. Maybe someone could live with just one car instead of two. So there's some opportunities there and worth keeping in mind when we get to crafting strategies about any potential zoning changes there. So that's it for development constraints. It's not the most glamorous or exciting part of the housing production plan. I think it similarly can help to get us thinking for the more exciting opportunities part, the goals and strategies that we'll be doing for next week. So that's all I got there for that agenda item. Too.
Does anyone have any questions on that?
No, I'm excited for that actually. I think that's really helpful, especially like the producer price index and yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, looking forward to hearing your thoughts and any feedback from you and the rest of the committee.
And then on upcoming project milestones, Noah, I know one of the questions I've got to brief you and Sam and I need to go brief the town council at some point in time here in the spring about where we are and where we expect to be before we can, produce a finished product to them. So if you can just touch base on 3D as far as what's upcoming for us at our next meeting, and then what's upcoming over the next couple of meetings.
Absolutely. And I am going to go back to the very beginning of my slides that I skipped over just to show you guys visually. We are here in between phases 2 and 3. So we're just now wrapping up housing needs assessment. We'll get your comments and feedback. Get that. That is the meat of the plan, the vast majority of the pages are going to be housing needs assessment, development constraints, and then another little chapter which is called local capacity. So we're doing really good with that. And then this engagement and drafting phase is really where we are now, finishing up some interviews, some focus groups, and then in the spring going to do an in-person, I believe in person, but I'll have to check the scope, an open forum to have the community come and hear more about this and also share the goals and strategies we've come up with next month. Still targeting May 2025 to finish up the plan. And I have a sort of a timeline here too. We're here in January, finishing housing needs assessment, engagement and drafting, and then really April and May are for finalizing the plan and presenting to the town council and the planning board, who have to vote to adopt it before we can send it off to the state to get them to look at it and give it the stamp of approval. That's the big plan there. I'm going to
Can I ask one question on that? Is the state normally, in the past, it was about 3 months from when a municipality sent their housing production plan to the state before EOHLC would approve it. Is that still about that same timeline? They take about 3 months to do that?
Yeah, I would say most recently, I think for Chatham and both Holliston, it was closer to 6 weeks, but they might have just, not had as big of a backlog. I'd say what's planned for 3 months, and it'll be great if it's a little sooner.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I'm skipping to the very end of the presentation now, just to tell you guys, I think the big item, 2 big ticket items, and I believe a colleague, Flavia, will be doing the presentation we shared last month, way back in December, on the housing needs assessment to the planning board in a few weeks, which is part of the scope. We'll have questions, and it's also good just to get the planning board thinking about this, because they're going to have to vote to adopt it, over it down the road in May. Next meeting will be the following week, 2/18 at 6 p.m. And then the big question for you all is whether we could do it in a hybrid format. We're going to be in town doing a community tour, driving around, looking at potential sites and areas that Samantha would like to show us, and also a few just things that'll be on our list. But would love to maybe get a chance, if possible, to meet at town hall and talk through ideas for goals and strategies in person to really get the brainstorming going. So yeah, really, I think that's the big question, is if that would be an option for the committee next month.
Well, personally, I think that's a good idea. We could either do it at town hall in one of the conference rooms, or we could do it at the public safety building, depending on how many people we anticipate. There's an auditorium there attending. But yes, I think it would be a good idea for us to meet. Sometimes it's easier to facilitate the discussion if we're sitting there at the table together than doing it on Zoom. And that would be on the 18th at 6 o'clock.
Yes, 18th at 6 o'clock during our regularly scheduled meeting for February.
Through the
Does
chair,
anyone else have any thoughts on that?
I have one quick question. Through the chair, Mr. Harper, would you anticipate that it would be about the same amount of time, only about an hour or so, trying to wrap up around 7 o'clock, or do you think that it would end up being longer?
I think we could do it just for an hour. Particularly, that'll be the real agenda item. We'll just be working on goals and strategies. So we'll do our very best to keep it to an hour.
Okay, if anyone doesn't have any other questions or comments for Noah, do we have anybody on, Sam, for public comment? I don't see anybody looking at I got the gallery screen up here. I don't see anybody for public comment, but do we have anybody?
I don't see anybody either, and I have not had anybody reach out for public comment.
Okay, thanks. Then we'll move on. So we have 2 minutes to approve. I assume everybody's had an opportunity to look over the October 15th, 24 and the December 17th, 24 minutes that Sam was kind enough to put together. Does anyone have any questions or comments about the October 15th minutes? All right, so I'll entertain a motion if anybody has a motion to approve those minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
And do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, did you get those names down, Sam? I saw that Gail. All right, so we have it's been moved and seconded to approve the October 15th, 2024 meeting minutes. If you could do the roll call for it, Sam, please.
Yes. Alex Garino,
Yes.
Karen McMaster,
Yes.
Don Valerio,
Yes.
Douglas Butler,
Yes.
Lorna Davidson Connolly,
Yes.
Karen DeJoy,
Yes.
Theo Knoll,
Yes.
Carol Plotkin,
Yes.
Gail Sievert,
Yes.
and Robert Vincent.
Yes. All right, and once again, I think so that's been approved. What is that? 10-0, 10-0. I think that's 10 folks that we have here out of the 12, right? Because Sam's not here and John is not here. So
Correct.
that's approved 10-0. All right, do I have a motion to approve the December 17th, 2024 meeting minutes?
I move to accept the December 17th minutes.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Carol. All right, could you do the same thing, Sam, again? Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just trying to take notes so I don't miss this. All right. Alex, excuse me,
Yes.
Alex Garino, Karen McMaster,
Yes.
Don Valerio,
Yes.
Doug Butler.
I think I abstained because I wasn't there.
Okay. Lorna Davidson Connolly,
Yes.
Karen DeJoy,
Yes.
Theo Knoll,
Yes.
Carol Plotkin,
Yes.
Gail Sievert,
Yes.
and Robert Vincent.
Yes. So that's 9 approving the minutes and 1 abstention. All right, thank you all. Item number 6, chair comments. My only comments are, once again, I really thank you all for volunteering to serve on this advisory committee. It's extremely important for the town to get this right and to have a housing production plan to help us get through the rest of this decade. So I really appreciate your dedication to this endeavor. And we've talked about the fact that our next meeting is going to be February 18th at 6 o'clock. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
Thank you, Carol.
All right. I don't think, well, I don't know, Sam, do you want to do one more time? Of going through the
I
rest
can
of
do
the-
one more. We're almost done.
right,
Alex Garino,
Yes.
Karen McMaster,
Yes.
Don Valerio,
Yep.
Doug Butler. Mr. Butler, you're muted.
Yes, sorry. I
It's
was
okay. I
muted.
know it happens. Lorna Davidson Connolly,
Yes.
Karen DeJoy,
Yes.
Theo Knoll,
Yes.
Carol Plotkin,
Yes.
Gail Sievert,
Yes.
and Robert Vincent.
Yes. All right. Thank you all very much. And we'll keep you posted as to whether we'll do the next one hybrid and where that location is going to be.